My father-in-law brought a 23-year-old man to live in his West Vancouver home. For 8 days, neither of them left the East Wing. And every night, through the walls of that house, came sounds that made it impossible to sleep. There are houses that look like nothing is wrong from the outside. The Whitmore property on Chartwell Drive was one of them. 7,000 square feet of cedar and glass perched above the inlet, with Hollyburn Mountain behind it, and the city lights of Vancouver spread below like scattered coins. My husband Adam's parents had built it 30 years ago, when Whitmore Properties was still a mid-sized firm, before it grew into one of the most recognized property development companies in the Lower Mainland. From the street, you would never know anything was breaking inside. Adam's mother, Carolyn, had passed away from ovarian cancer 2 winters ago. She spent her last 6 weeks at home, in the ground floor guest suite, at the end of the east hallway, a room her husband Arthur had converted into a palliative care space with a hospital bed, a morphine pump, and a view of the garden she loved. After she died, the medical equipment was removed, and the room was professionally cleaned. But no one in the family entered it casually. To Adam and his sister Vera, it was still Carolyn's room. It still smelled faintly of the gardenia perfume she'd worn for 40 years. The night everything changed started the way most Whitmore family dinners do, with something ordinary hiding something enormous. Arthur had called us all together on a Thursday, which was unusual. He was not a man who summoned people without reason. When we arrived, Vera was already there, standing near the kitchen island with a glass of Chardonnay she hadn't touched. Her husband Preston sat at the dining table, jacket on, posture perfect. The kind of posture that said he had already rehearsed this evening in his head. I work in finance. I have been a corporate controller for 11 years, and I have learned that the people who prepare the most for a conversation they claim not to have expected are usually the ones with the most to gain from it. Arthur came in from the study without ceremony and sat down. He set his fork beside his plate and said, "I need you all to know that I've asked someone to stay here for a while. His name is Felix. He's 23 years old. He arrived this afternoon." The silence that followed had weight. Adam looked up from his water glass. "Who is Felix?" "Martin Ashby's son," Arthur said. He picked up his fork as if the conversation might continue normally from there. "Martin passed in February. Felix doesn't have anyone else here." Martin Ashby had been Arthur's closest friend since their first year at UBC. I had heard the name hundreds of times. The man who had held Canucks season tickets with Arthur for 2 decades, who was Adam's godfather, who had flown in from Calgary the week Carolyn died, and sat with Arthur in the kitchen until 3 in the morning. Martin's own death, a sudden stroke at 64, had hit Arthur harder than he'd let any of us see. He had come back from the Calgary funeral quieter than I had ever known him. But I had never heard of a son. Vera put her wine glass down slowly. "You've never mentioned Martin had a son." Martin didn't talk about him much. They had some difficult years. Arthur's tone closed the door on that line of questioning. "And he's staying in this house," Adam said. It wasn't a question. "In the East Suite. I've had it set up." Vera went still. I watched her face move through several things before settling on the one Preston would have coached her toward. Controlled concern. "Dad, that's Mom's room. It's a guest room." It was her room. Arthur stood and carried his plate to the sink, something he never did before a meal was finished. "Felix needs somewhere quiet and stable. He's been through something very difficult. He'll be staying here for a while, and I'm asking you to be respectful of that." He paused with his back to us. "I won't be answering questions about this tonight." Preston cleared his throat. "Of course, Arthur. Family first. We completely understand." He said it smoothly, immediately, nothing visible on the surface. But I noticed that he had tucked his phone face down the moment Arthur walked in. And the notepad on the table beside his plate had 2 lines of careful handwriting on it that I could not read from where I sat. Felix arrived the following morning with a single duffel bag. I saw him from the upstairs landing. He was thin in a way that made me think of someone who had been forgetting to eat. His hair was longer than fashionable, and he wore an old Gore-Tex jacket. The kind students wear on the Sky Train. Not the kind you'd bring to move into a home in West Vancouver. He shook Arthur's hand in the entryway, and then stood for a moment, looking at the family photographs on the wall. When he reached Carolyn's, the formal portrait from her 50th birthday, he looked at it longer than he needed to. Arthur said something quiet to him. Felix nodded and followed him down the east hallway. I heard the lock click. That night, the first sounds came. I was at the upstairs desk reviewing a contract summary when something dropped below me. Heavy, sudden. Silence. Then Arthur's voice, low and pressed. The kind of voice you use when you are trying to keep someone calm while you yourself are barely holding it together. I put down the contract and sat in the dark. Adam appeared in the doorway. He had heard it too. It's probably nothing, I said, because I wanted it to be true. He looked at me for a moment. Right. We both stayed awake for another hour. The sounds came twice more before the house went quiet. By the fourth day, Vera was calling me every morning. Her first call caught me at a drive-thru off Marine Drive, waiting for coffee. She didn't bother with a greeting. He's disabled the cameras in the east hallway. Preston asked our IT manager, Cody, and Cody confirmed it. Arthur had him disable the motion sensors and set the cameras to privacy mode. Felix hasn't left that room in 4 days. Arthur brings meals on a tray. He won't let the housekeeper near it. Won't let anyone near it. Vera. My mother died in that room. Her voice cracked for just a second, then hardened. And now a 23-year-old we've never met is locked inside, and Dad won't say a single word, and we're supposed to just carry on? I didn't argue. Because honestly, the situation was alarming. I just wasn't sure Vera was alarmed about the right things. Preston's voice came through in the background, low, reasonable. Tell her about the trustee matter. Vera hesitated. Preston thinks I should formally request a review of the family trust, given that there's a non-family member now resident in the property. I asked her when Preston had drafted the request. She was quiet for a beat too long before she said she didn't know what I meant. I started looking at Preston's numbers that Friday evening. As controller for Whitmore Properties, I had access to the family's corporate accounts. Preston's firm, Ashwood Build Corp., held a standing supply contract with us. I pulled the invoices, the payment history, the credit report from our last contract renewal. Then I compared them against what I could access through our shared accounting platform. Ashwood was in serious trouble. 3 residential projects in the Fraser Valley had stalled on municipal permitting. A construction loan of just over $800,000 was coming due in less than a month. The quarterly draws Preston had requested from Whitmore Properties were each just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic internal review. I sat with that for a long time. Outside, October rain ran down the office windows in long, steady lines. The picture wasn't complete, but it was enough to want to see the rest of it. On the 8th night, Adam and I were in the upstairs hallway when the sounds were the worst. Something hit the floor below us, sudden and heavy. Then Felix's voice, ragged, calling out something I couldn't make out through the walls. Then Arthur, look at me. Stay here. You're with me. You're safe. Adam gripped the stair railing until I could see his knuckles. That is not nothing, he said. I know. I'm going down. I put my hand on his arm, not to stop him, but to buy 10 seconds of thought. If we went through that door without understanding what was actually happening, we could shatter something very fragile. Arthur's voice continued below us, low, measured, unbroken. The kind of voice you use to anchor someone who is drifting loose from themselves. The sounds subsided. A long quiet followed. The strip of light under the east wing door stayed on. Adam didn't sleep, neither did I. I found Felix in the garden at 10:30 the following evening. He was standing at the side gate near the cedar hedge, a small bag over one shoulder, wearing the same Gore-Tex jacket he had arrived in. He was shaking, cold, or something else, or both. He startled badly when I said his name. Please don't call anyone inside. He said it immediately, almost desperately. I'm not taking anything. I don't want anything from your family. I just can't keep doing this to him. His voice was 23 years old and sounded 50. I asked him where he was going. He looked at the gate, then back at me, and something in him seemed to decide that honesty was less exhausting than a lie. He opened the bag. Inside, a change of clothes, a phone charger, a folder of documents he clutched slightly too tightly, and 3 prescription bottles, 2 antidepressants, and a sleep medication. Arthur has been very kind, Felix said. But every time I have an episode, the whole house knows. His kids think I know what they think. I heard Vera talking last week when she came by. He looked down at the bag. I can go to my dad's neighbor in Calgary, she offered. I just don't want Arthur to feel like he has to keep doing this. What exactly is this? I asked. He was quiet. Then, my dad named Arthur as the executor of his estate. There's a probate dispute. A woman my dad had been seeing is claiming he made verbal promises to her. It's not true, but it's going to take months to resolve, and I need a stable address and a legal next of kin contact for the proceedings. Arthur took me in because my dad asked him to, in a letter. He wrote it 6 months before he died, like he knew he might not have much time. Felix pressed his lips together. I found my dad. Found him on his kitchen floor on a Saturday morning. I'm still not doing well with that. Arthur's voice came from behind me before I heard his footsteps. Felix. He came through the side door, moving faster than a man his age should have to. When he saw Felix at the gate with the bag, his face changed entirely. Not the anger of a patriarch being defied, the terror of someone, watching a person they love, walk toward an edge in the dark. He came and stood close to Felix and said quietly, "Come inside, please, we'll talk." Felix shook his head, tears running. "I'm making everything worse for you." "You are not." Arthur's voice did not waver. "Martin asked me to look after you, not as a favor to him, because you matter. Come inside." It took a long moment, but Felix came inside. The probate dispute broke into the open 3 days later. Not through us, but through a man named Gordon, who appeared at the Chartwell Drive gate, claiming to represent Felix's former roommates in Calgary. He carried a folder of alleged unpaid debts with Felix's on them. He also knew, somehow, that Arthur had disabled the cameras in the East Wing. I watched Preston's face when Gordon mentioned the cameras. A small recalibration, barely visible, and then his smooth voice. "Arthur, I think this confirms we need to formalize the family's position. I've prepared something for Vera." He put a folder on the kitchen table. I reached it before Vera did. It was a proxy authorization, granting Vera voting rights over Arthur's shares in Whitmore Properties during any period of reputational or legal uncertainty. 2 years duration, renewable. Buried in an addendum, a clause permitting Vera to designate an acting representative to exercise those votes on her behalf. I looked at Preston. "Who is the acting representative?" He smiled carefully. That's standard flexibility language. "It gives you effective control of 12% of a publicly registered family company for 2 years, I said. While your own firm is about to default on an $800,000 construction loan." Vera turned slowly to look at her husband. The kitchen went very quiet. I pulled Cody into the server room the next morning. He looked like someone who hadn't slept. The full access log, the raw Pipedia compliance backup that the system archives automatically, not the version users see on the interface, told a clear story. 6 days ago, Cody had exported a filtered version of the East Wing security data to an external address. The filter had removed all entries showing Dr. Emile Renaud, a Vancouver-based psychiatrist, accessing the property through the garden gate. It removed timestamps corresponding to Felix's scheduled medical appointments. What remained was a log showing a young man confined to a room, cameras disabled, no recorded exits, for days, a clean frame. The external address traced back to a holding company registered in Surrey that appeared on Ashwood Buildcorp's vendor list. I printed both versions, the original and the export, side by side. Then I called Arthur's lawyer. Adam came through the door because Felix had a severe episode, the kind where the physical symptoms overwhelm everything, shaking and losing track of where he was, and crying out without meaning to. Arthur had been with him for 20 minutes when the water glass went off the nightstand, and Felix called out loud enough to wake the house. Adam hit the lock with his shoulder twice before it gave. What he found was not what any of us had been afraid of. Felix sat on the bed, his face chalk white, hands gripping the sheet, breathing hard. Arthur was beside him, one hand on Felix's back, counting slowly and steadily, out loud. On the nightstand, a glass of water, a prescription bottle, a notepad with Dr. Renaud's after-hours number, written in Arthur's handwriting. The room smelled of the eucalyptus oil the doctor had recommended for grounding exercises. Adam stood in the doorway and could not speak. Vera appeared behind him. She looked at Felix, at the room, at her father, and I watched her face do something slow and complicated that began as disbelief and moved, gradually, toward something closer to shame. Arthur looked at both of his children. He had been awake for most of 8 days, and he looked every hour of it. "Felix is Martin's son," he said. "Martin asked me in writing to make sure this boy didn't go through probate alone, in a city where he knows no one, grieving a father he found dead on a Saturday morning. I brought Felix here because I have space, because Martin was my closest friend for 40 years, because he died alone. Arthur's voice got very quiet at the end. I didn't tell you, because I thought you'd assume I was redirecting Martin's estate assets, and because Felix's situation, his health, was not mine to explain to anyone else without his consent. He meant Felix's mental health. He also meant something quieter than that. Something about what it takes to keep choosing to stay when your grief is so large it fills every room. Adam sat down in the chair by the window and put his face in his hands. Then he looked up at Felix. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't understand what was happening." Felix nodded. He was still shaking, but he looked at Adam with something close to relief. The particular relief of someone who has been braced for the worst and found something smaller waiting on the other side of it. Gordon's debt documents were found by Arthur's lawyer to carry Felix's signature on dates when he was admitted to a psychiatric unit in Calgary, dates when he was, verifiably, unable to enter into any legal agreement. The lawyer filed a complaint with the relevant provincial authority. The BCSC was notified about Preston's proxy attempt and his company's undisclosed financial exposure to Whitmore Properties, which triggered a formal review of the supply contract. Preston did not return to the Chartwell Drive house. Vera did, twice quietly, without him. The second time, she brought a container of the butternut squash soup she used to make with her mother when Adam and she were small. She left it outside the East Wing door without knocking, without waiting. I thought that was, in its own way, exactly right. Arthur formalized his role as Felix's legal point of contact through the BC probate court. Felix began weekly appointments with Dr. Renaud and, by January, had enrolled in a few courses at Langara College. Not because anyone suggested it, but because he had mentioned once that his father had always wanted him to finish his degree. The cameras in the east hallway were switched back on the day Felix said he was ready. He asked Arthur to repaint the room, a soft green, the color of his childhood bedroom in Calgary. Greta, the housekeeper, who had been with the family since Carolyn was alive, put a small potted fern on the windowsill. She told me that plants need consistency, that you cannot move them too much once they have begun to settle. I think about that. About the things we lock away because we are afraid of what other people will assume when they see them. About how silence, even when it comes from kindness, has a way of becoming the most damaging thing in a room. Arthur should have told us sooner. Not everything. Some of it was Felix's to tell. But enough. He chose secrecy because he was afraid of being misunderstood, and in doing so, he handed the people who wanted to take advantage of that fear exactly the tool they needed. Some people spend their whole lives believing that carrying something alone is the same as protecting the people they love. It isn't. And in this family, it almost cost us something none of us could have gotten back.